Hello, friends, and welcome back to Dare Me to Prosper. My name is Avery, and I'm your host, and I honestly don't know what episode number this is, so I think it might be 52, but I'm not going to go back and check right now. Anyway, today's episode is actually another listener question, and I love this episode topic. I'm kind of surprised I haven't done it yet, and that is spiritual psychosis. Spiritual. I don't know why I'm saying that weird today. Spiritual psychosis and what people get wrong about it. Really great topic, and I think it's something that is important to talk about for sure. So just a reminder that if you are a patron, you get access to any Q&A episodes. You have the ability to suggest topics. So a little perk to being a patron, in addition to the extra episode every week, is your topic suggestions get top of the line attention. So okay, the reason that I really think this is such an important topic is because something that I have noticed online, and something that I assume, or something that I'm willing to bet you have also noticed online, is that the phrase spiritual psychosis has kind of become this catch-all phrase, or a phrase that people use to kind of attack people who have different beliefs than them. And I kind of see this term spiritual psychosis as in the same camp as conspiracy theory, where it's kind of like this term conspiracy theory is just used to attack ideas that somebody doesn't believe in or doesn't agree with or they think is outlandish. And I just think that's really unfair, because it doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory is fact or true, but you can't just take something that you don't agree with and say that's a conspiracy theory or that's spiritual psychosis, because immediately what it does is you're just invalidating someone else with this term that when it starts to gain traction, it just becomes this really kind of automatic term where it's just used to like write people off, or it's used to write an idea off. And so people kind of get trained to hear a phrase like that, hear a phrase conspiracy theory, or hear a phrase spiritual psychosis, and their mind automatically just goes to invalidating or you're crazy. And that is just way too broad, and it's just such a blanket statement, and it's not a fair definition of what might actually be spiritual psychosis or what might actually be a conspiracy theory. And I don't even like to use that term. I would just say a theory that could be really outlandish, or it could be that it sounds outlandish, but it's actually very accurate, as I think we've been learning over the last few years as all of these things come out from our government and our leaders and around the world that sound crazy and yet have been proven to be true. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So it's not fair or accurate to say that anything that feels too far out to one person is not valid. So we're going to use this episode to kind of define the difference between something that might actually be spiritual psychosis and something that just maybe sounds too far out to some people, and that's okay. People are allowed to have different opinions, different beliefs, different perceptions. That's part of life, right? That applies to everything, but it doesn't make it psychotic. We're not going to diagnose anyone, but we're just going to try to understand better what is actual psychosis, which should more obviously be just tied to regular psychosis. Like if you think about what actually makes someone just regular psychotic, spiritual psychosis is just another flavor of being regular psychotic. So let's talk about that. First of all, because I think this is a really relative topic just in general. All of this kind of ties to like the greater picture of what's happening in the collective. And that is that people are uncomfortable with anything that challenges their own framework. Anything that is outside of their sense of what normal is feels really out there or crazy. But that is always subjective, always subjective. Because here's the thing, I always like to use religion as a good example of this, and I'm going to use Christianity because that's what I'm most familiar with. But if you were not aware of Christianity, if you had never grown up even hearing about that, never knew what it was, you had never heard of Jesus, if somebody came to you from out of the blue and was like, yeah, so actually 2,000 years ago, this guy came and he was born, his mom was a virgin, so he didn't actually have a biological dad, and And then he like walked on water and he performed all these miracles. Oh, and by the way, he told everybody that, you're a sinner. Oh, but then he died. Actually, he was murdered. And because that happened, you're forgiven for everything bad that you've ever done. Oh, and that means you get to go to heaven if you believe everything I just said. And if you don't believe everything I just said, then you're going to burn for eternity. Like, doesn't that sound absolutely insane? Now, obviously, they wouldn't explain it that way, right? They would put a totally different spin on it. But the point is, as much as you could possibly spin that to even make it sound better, if I heard that and had never been exposed to that idea before, had never heard of that, I would be like, you are psychotic. You have been brainwashed to believe something that is absolutely not true. And I'm not sure how you bought into this idea, right? But that is normalized in our culture. I believed that at one time. And the biggest thing that makes that believable is not because it sounds super realistic or believable, but because it's accepted and adopted by so many people, both now and historically. And that happened over time. Like, they didn't just dump that story on everybody all of a sudden, right? It was something that was kind of created and developed throughout years and years and years. And that's a whole nother podcast episode in itself. But I use this example as kind of an eye-opening comparison to say that lots of things sound insane. It's just a matter of how comfortable or how normalized they are in your worldview. So it's totally subjective. And oftentimes, what it comes down to is kind of a contrast between these two paradigms, right? There's a mainstream worldview, which only validates like what you can see and physically or logistically measure. Like, oh, I can scientifically measure this, or I can see this with my eyeballs, or I can see a study that was done on this, which, just FYI, there's lots of scientific studies. There's lots of academic papers and journals and whatnot on spiritual topics as well. It's just that, one, those aren't as mainstream, and two, a lot of them are newer, coming out only recently, and a lot of them have also been sort of just suppressed because, especially anything, and this is not just spiritual topics, this is any topic that would kind of hinder, say, the money that the medical field would make, or the money that, any big system, any corporate system that we have, anything that might take away income or power from one of those systems, those studies get buried. Okay, so that's just something to note also when it comes to the mainstream worldview. But again, mainstream worldview, that paradigm is like only validating what you can see or feel with your actual senses, right? Versus an energetic perception paradigm where people are more reliant on their intuition, on their emotional energy, on their mental energy, and consider those valid guides for decision making, valid evidence of things that are or are not true. And these people recognize that your internal state shapes your experience and attracts aligned circumstances, versus the materialist worldview, which believes that the world kind of happens to you. You are a victim of, your surroundings to a certain extent, versus in the energetic paradigm, your frequency and alignment shape what shows up for you. You're much more empowered. You are much more in control of your circumstances. And therefore, you really validate what you sense, what happens inside of you and your intuition and your mental and emotional energy. But people who really come from this materialistic worldview do not trust anything that they cannot see or touch or feel as legitimate, because it's harder to prove. It's not impossible to prove, but it is more difficult, and there is not as much readily available information that you can just go hunt down. Okay, so what are the dangers of invalidating people's spiritual experiences? Because there is harm to this. First of all, just labeling somebody as psychotic is just really unfair, and it's really not only invalidating, but just really insulting. It can really, it's just like any other insult or personal attack on someone. It really makes people question their own self-worth, their own intuition. It kind of shuts down people's spiritual awakening. It shuts down their trust in themselves, which is really, really important. And this is important for anyone, no matter what you believe, but your trust in yourself is directly related to your self-worth, to your ability to make decisions, to your ability to make good choices. Like, if you don't trust yourself, you can't really make good decisions. You put your life in someone else's hands. So regardless of what you believe, everyone should have a certain amount of trust. And that's hard earned. But what happens when people label other people as spiritually psychotic or just talk about spiritual psychosis in general as this blanket statement for just anything that they don't agree with? You end up mislabeling entire sources of knowledge that invaluably helps people navigate their own lives. Like I talk a lot about my personal deconstruction with Christianity. That being said, I am very much of the mindset that it's not my job to tell people what they can or cannot believe. Like for some people, I'm genuinely saying this, even though I have kind of a traumatic background with Christianity, for some people, that is a super important and super valid part of their lives. For some people, they need this structure of religion, even though I don't believe that it's true. For me, it was harmful. For some people, I recognize that it's genuinely helpful. And so it's not my job to convince them that something that they have built their entire life around is not true. If they were to deconstruct Christianity, that needs to happen on their own. I only speak to people who are already in a place of deconstruction. If somebody is ready to deconstruct, then sure. But it's never my job to push that on people. My job is to share information from my own perspective for people who are ready to receive it. Okay, so my point here is that it's not fair to dismiss anyone's worldview that is an important part of who they are. It's similar to trying to dismiss someone's culture. Like if somebody really resonates with their ethnic culture and where they came from and all of that, that's not fair. You can't just step in and be like, actually, you were born in America. So as an American citizen, you're not allowed to relate to your own culture. How whack would that be, right? It's kind of the same thing. Like you can't just step into somebody's life and say, you are not allowed to relate to this belief system that you have. And that goes for everyone. That goes for spirituality, that goes for religion, that goes for any belief system that anybody has. One of the most important parts of our life on earth is free will, and everything that we believe has a purpose. So again, this is why spirituality is not a religion, because it's not something that everybody needs to believe. It is my personal belief that no matter what you believe on earth, we are all going to end up in the same place. And part of our experience here on earth is learning and growing and evolving. And that can happen through all sorts of different experiences. We don't need to all believe the same thing in order to learn and to grow and develop. Do I believe that spirituality and the path that I'm on is a really informative way to understand exactly what's happening in my life? Does it give me a structure for why things happen and the way things happen and tools to navigate my life really, really well? Yes, I believe that is the case. Does that mean everybody needs to believe this? Absolutely not. Okay. We don't have to agree, but just like religion could be seen as religious psychosis, right? But we don't call it that because we're just used to it and we label it religion. And instead of saying religious psychosis, people just make points to why they don't believe that, or they, explain why, well, this isn't true because XYZ, and they get to have the free will to express that opinion. You can do the same thing with spirituality. You don't have to believe everybody else. This is part of a larger problem. And I just posted a TikTok video about this, but this is like part of this larger problem where we tend to attack things that we don't agree with, or people who have different beliefs than us. We tend to just attack them instead of just understanding that person has a different understanding of the world. That person has a different belief system because their life is shaped by their upbringing and the way that their brain works. And we're all different for a reason. Okay, I'm getting off a little bit on a tangent, but let's talk about what is spiritual psychosis? What does that actually look like? Okay, it's not about the content of what you believe. You can have weird beliefs and be mentally grounded, and then you can have really mainstream, ordinary beliefs and be genuinely psychotic. Okay, and like I said earlier, true spiritual psychosis is just very similar to regular psychosis, okay? So if you think of somebody that maybe would benefit from being, I don't like the word institutionalized because I don't think anybody really benefits from being quote unquote institutionalized. But if you think of someone who is really having a psychotic break and needs support or, needs a contained environment to kind of get regrounded, it's the same thing with spiritual psychosis, okay? True spiritual psychosis happens when a person's nervous system and energy field becomes so dysregulated that they lose their ability to discern inner reality from outer reality, like real life in the physical realm and what's happening inside of their body. They have the inability to decipher which from which, or what from what. Is which from which a term? Okay, so this can look like spiraling, right? Just overthinking and spiraling and kind of having a panic attack over something that is only happening internally, right? And we know panic attacks happen just because of simple anxiety. We wouldn't call that psychosis, but it's more like this constant spiraling where, something is just happening in your head that you cannot decipher between physical reality and internal reality, and it's sending you into a spiral. Okay. Also, the loss of like personal agency and the ability to make decisions. Like it's hard to explain. I feel like it's kind of an abstract, and I'll give some examples in a minute, but like just this loss of personal autonomy, of personal agency, the loss of the ability to control yourself and your own thoughts and your own actions, which is totally different from just some outlandish belief that you have. Okay. Also, the inability to discern symbolic things from literal things. Like somebody could say, oh, I saw a snake in my dream, or I saw a snake in my meditation. And I felt like that was a symbol for transformation, and that my guides are trying to tell me that I'm going through a transformative phase, right? That would be just like a general spiritual belief versus I saw a snake in my dream, and now I believe that a snake is controlling my body right now. Like I'm not in control of my arms. There is a snake inside of me that is controlling all of my movements and my thoughts, and I'm being possessed by a snake demon. You know what I mean? Kind of these thoughts of, it's again, that loss of personal autonomy. Like something is out to get me, something is after me, I'm possessed, those sort of things. Also, assigning cosmic meaning or assigning a psychic, like intense psychic meaning to every single little natural event. Like there's a song that comes on the radio and someone thinks, oh, this deity is sending me instructions to harm someone. You know what I mean? It's like when people say, oh, God told me to walk into this public place and cause a massacre. Absolutely not. Like that would be one of the most extreme versions of spiritual psychosis, or even religious psychosis for that matter. Or again, something really simple like there's a street light that flickers, and instead of saying, oh, like I wonder if there's an ancestor trying to talk to me, right? That's just like internal, that's your own thoughts. Like there's a difference between that and, oh, the street light flickered. The FBI is watching me right now, and that was their Morse code, and I need to go into hiding. You know what I mean? It's just like this extreme version of panic or spiraling or intensity that just really has no basis. It's like everything becomes absolute. Everything becomes super literal. Everything becomes super ungrounded. Kind of like everything is an emergency almost. Okay? So you would think of this similarly for someone that you would just say has like a general psychosis, right? It would be like somebody who feels possessed, or somebody who feels like everybody's out to get them, or somebody who feels like it's their purpose in life to harm someone. Okay. This also applies to people who feel like they're the chosen one, or on the flip side, people who feel like they're being singled out and persecuted by God or the universe or some demon or something. Like they're under attack. Like dark forces are after me because I'm important, or on the other side, being the chosen one, I'm the reincarnation of Jesus or this important person or this celebrity. Again, it all revolves around these like extremes that kind of single out this particular person as really important or really targeted in a way that is just above and beyond what would be like a natural, grounded spiritual intuition. Because here's the thing, and I say this a lot, but in terms of intuition and just like spiritual beliefs and spiritual experiences, 99% of the time, spiritual experiences and intuition are very subtle, gentle, calm. Anytime you are like receiving a download or a message or intuition, first of all, it's never going to be given to you in the form of fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety is a very low frequency. And if you are receiving information from your higher self or your guides or source or whatever, those are very high frequency beings, very high frequency energy. So anything coming to you, even if it was a warning of some sort, it would come into your mind as, hey, maybe we should take this different route home. Or, hey, maybe we should, go over here nudged in this direction. The important thing to note is you always have free will. You don't have to listen to it ever. The more tuned in you are, the more you can pick up on it. You can decide. You can sense that, you know what, I feel like this is maybe a message that I should lean in this direction. But you always have the ability to choose, which is actually a super important part of the process. And it's always very gentle and subtle. It's never going to be this intense, over the top, extreme sort of energy because your free will is such a big part of it. And if something were just dumped on you as like a command or, something really intense, it would really override your free will, which is just completely against universal law. Okay. So it's like if someone is experiencing spiritual psychosis, instead of like the natural intuition, they would perceive something as a threat or a command or a rule. Like, if I don't do this, something bad is going to happen. That is never your intuition speaking, okay? And I kind of already mentioned this, but like your normal intuition versus external projection, like again, not being able to perceive what's physical reality and what's not, like internal voices versus external voices, or seeing, shadows and bodies and not being able to differentiate that from like your family members in your house and things like that. Like if we were to sum it all up, it would be spiritual awakening broadens your reality. It gives you extra tools. It raises your frequency. It helps you feel more calm and grounded. Spiritual psychosis collapses your reality and it makes you feel more panicked, more intense, more extreme. So really, you can kind of look at your own emotions and your own feelings and how you feel in your body to say, is this grounded spirituality or is this psychosis? And if you're here listening to this, it's probably not psychosis. But this is really good to know in general. But okay, so we just talked about, what's not normal. What does psychosis look like? Here's what is normal, just to verify and to validate things that you might be experiencing as a reminder that these are still normal, okay? So getting downloads and messages, especially if how they come in is very like gentle and subtle and intuitive, that is normal, okay? If you are growing in your like spiritual journey, if you are tuning into your third eye, if your gifts are coming online, that's very normal. Seeing shadows or light bodies. Again, I talked about this in the last few episodes. Very normal, okay? You can see shadows. You can see flickers of light. You can see, even there are certainly people, I don't do this personally, but there are certainly people who see full on like visions, and that doesn't mean they're psychotic. It means they have the ability to really accurately see and sense, usually like with their mind's eye, but they can see and sense like full-blown images or people, okay? That's normal. What's not normal is not being able to decipher that from the physical reality in front of your face. Okay? Having past life memories, that is normal. Having astral experiences, that is normal. Seeing lots of synchronicities and signs all over the place, that is normal. Feeling an energetic presence around you or being able to sense energy, pick up on energy around you, that is normal. I kind of just said this, but getting downloads, receiving knowledge, that is normal. As long as you're not feeling like, oh my God, the world is ending, or oh my God, I'm the chosen one, okay? Those extremes are not normal. But in general, just receiving downloads, even predictive downloads about the future, still normal, okay? The things you want to look out for are terror or paranoia. Terror or paranoia, those words are really hard to say together. Like a loss of functionality, a loss of awareness of your physical surroundings, okay? Feeling overwhelmed, feeling like your reality is collapsing. Again, I feel like I've kind of painted hopefully a good picture now of how extreme these two sides are and how you can easily recognize what is actual psychosis and what is a normal spiritual experience. Because I think it's really important, because if this buzzword kind of goes around where people just start to categorize anything that they don't align with or anything that they haven't experienced personally themselves as psychosis, that will train other people to also see that way. Because especially people who don't tend to critically think very well or tend to just believe something that they hear immediately without giving it any second thought or without waiting to test something or see something for themselves, it just kind of spreads this overall message of, oh, I'm not familiar with that, must not be true. Oh, also, I meant to talk about this when we were talking about the symptoms of actual spiritual psychosis, but I didn't mention, and this is important, the reason that this happens to people, okay? Why does this happen? Why does spiritual psychosis or just general psychosis actually happen? And I'm obviously not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. Like I'm not claiming that I could ever diagnose someone as actually like psychotic or understand all of the biological undercurrents of what's happening in the body. However, there's a few reasons generally that this happens. One reason, not purely, but physically and mentally, the same reason that lots of like mental illnesses happen, but either like there's a total imbalance of hormones or brain chemicals, things like that. Sometimes people are more genetically wired to fall into these tendencies. Things like drug and alcohol abuse can bring out these experiences. Trauma in someone's life can affect your brain in such a way that can bring out these experiences. Okay, on the more spiritual side of that, also, it happens when somebody's almost like your third eye opens faster than your body can catch up to. It's like when your awakening or your sensitivity to spiritual experiences increases faster than your body can ground. Again, this is a really important time to mention that tuning into your personal psychic intuitive gifts in a way that is grounded from the get-go is so, so important. In the course that I created, Sensitive to Psychic, the way that I teach how to develop your spiritual, your psychic gifts includes a foundational lesson on working through your blocks and basically getting grounded before you start tuning into that stuff. Working out the energetic blocks in your physical body before you start tuning into your third eye. Because that is a foundational piece of making sure that when you start tuning into your gifts, you're not just launching yourself into the Wild West, that you actually have context, that you actually have a grounded system that is ready to take this on. It's kind of like making sure you have a clean kitchen before you make a big meal. Like say that you're about to go cook Thanksgiving dinner, but your kitchen is trashed and all of your dishes are dirty, right? Like you're going to have a really hard time. You're going to be fumbling around your kitchen. You're going to have to try to clean things before you can use them. It's kind of like that. Like you're not going to completely escape this 100%. We all continue to learn and grow and regulate as we go. But if you try to bring everything online before you handle and process a lot of your trauma and a lot of your blocks, that's like trying to clean everything in your kitchen while you're simultaneously trying to cook Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's going to be much easier if you detox, if you wipe the slate, if you clean everything up, not everything, but if you clean up everything you can before you start this process. That will really give you a better chance of making sure that you are as grounded as possible before you start opening up all of these psychic abilities. Okay, so it's called Sensitive to Psychic. It's in the show notes, but I highly recommend that for anyone who feels like you might still have things to process or things to clear in your body or in your emotional system before you start opening yourself up to everything. And so it's kind of like if you picture it in your body, it's kind of like your mind is like wide open, but your body doesn't yet have the filter in place to discern what is grounded and what's not. And ideally, and most of the time, that kind of happens at the same time. Like we kind of come online, quote unquote, spiritually, gradually, step by step by step, even when you experience something like you're growing your intuition or you're starting to see things with your eyes, you're starting to, receive messages in your mind's eye. All of these things tend to happen step by step by step, because if it was all unleashed upon you at once, this is exactly the type of thing that would happen. You wouldn't know how to categorize anything. You wouldn't know how to navigate everything that is incoming. So when this happens, when people tend to awaken like too fast, your body can't efficiently ground what's happening. And so again, just like anything else, we talk about the nervous system all the time. I feel like the nervous system should almost be deemed like a spiritual system instead of like a biological system, because it's so closely intertwined to like your third eye, your chakras, your mental attunement, and that sort of thing. But anyway, essentially your nervous system is just kind of wide open with no filter. Okay, also, because I realized I didn't have this on my outline, but this would be a question I would ask. And so I feel like some of you also might ask this. But why would someone's sort of mental awakening happen faster than the grounding? Like, why would that happen to someone versus, I would say, the majority of people where it kind of happens together gradually? Okay, so you could kind of think of it like a tree that's growing, and it's growing branches and roots at the same time. The branches being kind of the upper chakra spiritual awakening, and the roots being like your physical groundedness. Like you need both to have a healthy tree. But if you have a bunch of branches that are just growing like crazy without the roots to hold them in place, the tree does what? I mean, it falls over, it dies, or it suffers, right? It doesn't work. So a few different reasons that this might happen is one, have you ever heard of people having like a sudden a sudden kundalini awakening and then kind of struggling afterwards? That's kind of, I don't want to call that necessarily spiritual psychosis, but that's definitely a situation where, your chakras, your upper chakras, your third eye goes through this like massive awakening too fast for your body to really catch up, okay? And this might be caused by like a near-death experience or an intense trauma release, or, and this is kind of hard to explain, but like basically you have hit a point in your soul contract or on your timeline where it's like it's time for you to awaken in order for you to have like the next parts of your life unfold, but you haven't done all the internal work yet. This doesn't always happen, but just for some people in some situations, it's like, okay, you need to wake up now, but you didn't really do all the work you were supposed to do beforehand, so you're going to feel a little bit unbalanced for a while. Again, that might not be full-blown psychosis, but that's just going to leave you feeling really unbalanced and really like all of a sudden, whoa, what the hell is happening to me? All of a sudden I'm seeing things. All of a sudden I'm hearing things. All of a sudden my dreams are off the charts and I wasn't prepared for any of this. That's somebody who kind of got dumped on without really getting the grounding benefits. Okay, so like your upper chakras are like your 3D, your crown, your throat, 3D, I meant to say third eye, your crown, your throat. Okay, it's like your intuition, your perception, your connection to higher realms. The lower chakras are more centered around like safety and identity and boundaries and your foundation, your identity. I already said identity. But those things all need to be integrated together at the same time, or you become basically top heavy, which would lead to someone, say, having or perceiving real intuitive messages, but not being able to interpret them correctly or not being able to interpret them in a grounded sense. It's just like you have all this information that you can't categorize. Okay, another thing that might cause this is when your nervous system is already super dysregulated before your awakening. So it's like if you were already in a really, really unbalanced state, like you were already in fight or flight, you were already kind of just having a really hard time, maybe you're already struggling with mental issues, you were already overly sensitive, dissociated, and then you kind of have this awakening, whether it was planned for that time or not, your body is going to kind of interpret that through a lens of fear and anxiety because that's already the state that your body was in, which again means that you might get kind of a sign or an intuitive message, but you decipher it or you interpret that as a threat or a warning or something like that. Okay. Also, again, going back to kind of the life path, the soul contract, the timeline, if you haven't listened to the episode on like soul contracts and like your personal timeline and plan before incarnating, go listen to that because having that background knowledge is going to be important here. But everybody plans certain events in their life for different lessons, for different reasons. And so there's just all sorts of different experiences that people plan on for different reasons. And for some people in particular, they planned ahead of time to have a really fast track awakening or to have like a really mission-based activation where it's like all of a sudden through a traumatic experience or through some huge catastrophic event in their life, it's like everything came online at once. Like they just had this like light bulb moment where they were like, oh my God, all of a sudden I understand. Okay, some people quite literally plan that ahead of time and they get downloads faster than their human identity can keep up with. And so it's very just destabilizing. And for some people, that is part of the process that they were always meant to take. Okay, so yes, from a grounded perspective, it's happening, quote unquote, too fast. But for some people, that might be part of the learning experience. But I don't think that's most people. So basically, these are all ways where this kind of too fast awakening can happen. When your awakening happens too fast like that, it doesn't mean that that's automatically going to lead to psychosis. However, it does mean that that is going to destabilize you in a way that could easily lead to psychosis. Does that make sense? Okay, so basically, if we're looking at people who experience spiritual psychosis and people who don't, The main difference in how this onset happens is people who have the capacity to integrate more slowly versus people who don't have the capacity to integrate slowly. So it's like people who integrate in a grounded way, step by step, gradually, which is most of us, and people who have to integrate way too fast and get destabilized. Okay, so essentially, like, this idea of spiritual psychosis is like everybody has access to this. There's not a person on the planet who doesn't have access to the spiritual realm, who doesn't have access to intuition or, messages or psychic abilities. Everybody has that ability. So spiritual psychosis, or even non-spiritual psychosis, can still relate to that because this is a part of everybody's life. It's like saying you have visual psychosis, right? Everybody has eyesight. It's just that some people are not interpreting what they're seeing correctly. Okay? Spiritual psychosis is somebody not interpreting their intuition or their spiritual downloads correctly. Does that all make sense? It just really comes down to your ability to decipher, your ability to critically think, your ability to stay in your own autonomy, just like regular psychosis. So again, I'm not a doctor. Don't take any of this as medical advice. But I hope this gives you a better understanding of why it's not okay to use spiritual psychosis as a blanket statement for things that we don't agree with. Like, you can't look at somebody and say, oh, you believe in spirit guides, so you have spiritual psychosis, which is often how that term gets used, which is completely unfair. Because I could easily say, oh, you believe in a guy who got murdered, and that forgives you for everything you've ever done bad in your life. Like, that could easily also be considered psychosis, okay? But there's a reason that we are all pulled to this, like, higher power ideas. I mean, some people aren't. Certainly atheists don't feel pulled to this higher power, calling. But for the majority of people, many, many people are kind of pulled to this idea of feeling like there is something bigger than ourselves that we feel attracted to and connected to. But we kind of have different ways of getting there. And that doesn't mean that somebody who is a Christian is psychotic. Doesn't mean that somebody who is spiritual is psychotic. Okay, these are just different belief systems. So, okay, I need to wrap this episode up. I hope that was helpful. Again, if you want to ask a question or request a topic for the podcast, make sure that you are a Patreon member. That is always linked in the show notes. Also, I would love your review. If you have listened to at least 2 of my episodes and enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review for the podcast. I really appreciate it, and it makes such a big difference. So if you haven't done that yet, please, please, please leave a review. Okay, that is it for today. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.